So there's a concept of a fail-safe system. Now you might have noticed that sometimes the traffic lights, they go out, they stop working, and what happens then? So, have you come across traffic lights that have stopped working?
Yes, sir.
So what color do they show? So do they all become green? They become flashing red,
Yes.
right? And that is the fail-safe mode. So that is an indication that there have been a failure, but you are warned, so better be safe. So that is sort of referred to as a fail-safe mode. And so that is safety. So sometimes you are interested in making sure that either the system is working correctly, or if it has failed in a manner which is safe. Now there are some, if you think about reliability and performance, if you want to get high reliability, sometimes you have to spend something for it, some extra resource, maybe extra hardware, extra time, or something. And sometimes you could have used the same thing for achieving higher performance. So you could have spent more money and gotten higher performance. So sometimes there's a trade-off between performance and reliability. So some people thought about a combination of measures which combines performance and reliability, and they call it performability. And then they can take into account things like graceful degradation. So sometimes if there is a small failure, maybe not bad enough to bring the system down, but it's with lower performance, in that case they will refer to that as graceful degradation. So performability is a measure that some people occasionally use. Any questions so far? Okay, some more measures. Security. Okay, security is now a major field. And in our computer science department, now that we have several people working in security. And security incorporates, in addition to availability, things like confidentiality, integrity, authentication. So that is security. And security is kind of a specialized thing. So when people talk about reliability, they consider all possible types of failures. But when you are talking about security, you are talking about security failures or bugs in the system that can allow others to intrude into the system. Survivability is sometimes used as a measure that combines other measures along with security. Now here, a couple of things that have to do with, that are sort of related. Testability, ease of detecting faults in a certain system. So you can design a system where it is easier to find faults, and so if you are a hardware engineer and if you are designing hardware, then you may want to design your system so that if there are defects, they could be easy to find. In fact, there are some design methodologies in hardware. We will talk about them. They incorporate some aspect of testability. Maintainability is, of course, ease of repairing a system after a failure. Now, some of these measures, some of these reliability attributes, they have a well-defined expression, but others are more concepts. So for example, when you talk about survivability, it is usually a concept rather than a number that you can come up with. Security, right now it is, there are some people who are trying to come up with some quantitative characterization of security, but right now it is more kind of a concept. Testability sometimes can be measured quantitatively, but sometimes people talk about it more at a non-quantitative way. And let's look at how the system can respond to faults. Now, as we know, in real life, there's no such thing as a fault-free system. So, so you basically kind of have to live with the faults. But of course, in this course, we want to look at methods that would avoid that as much as possible. What happens if there's an error at the output? In some cases, that may be unacceptable. But if it is a non-critical system, then occasionally you might accept it. So your laptop sometimes acts a little funny, but maybe after a while it comes back, starts working again. Maybe you rebooted it, and whatever the problem was, it has gone away. Then it's probably acceptable. Fault masking. Sometimes you want fault masking. You want output to be correct, even when a fault of a certain class occurs. Now, this is what you may need for critical applications. For example, in the autopilot system of a plane, they often have redundancy. So if there is an error, you want a correct output, even though internally there is some disagreement, there are some errors. Also in space and in manufacturing. Sometimes there is enough redundancy to basically mask the effect of the fault. Sometimes you want this fault secure property. That means either you want the output to be correct, or you want an indication at the output that there was an error. So the idea is that you have an indication that there was an error, and maybe you can retry it. So for example, let's say you're trying to do some, you're trying to make a payment through the internet, and if it goes through correctly, it will generate a receipt. And if it does not, it has not gone through correctly, it will not generate a receipt, or it will tell you that the transaction did not go through. And fail-safe I have already mentioned. Now, as I was mentioning, fault tolerance. Now, this is of course a computer science class, and of course we have people from electrical engineering, ECE, also. So in this class, the students are typically either from computer science or electrical engineering. Occasionally, we actually have students from other disciplines also. But one interesting thing to note is that fault tolerance is really universal, because the universe is imperfect. There's no such thing that is perfect, and hence, for anything to survive, you have to have fault tolerance. So this fault tolerance mechanism is made into natural objects. So, for example, we can find a number of examples of fault tolerance even in our bodies. So, for example, we have fat deposits in our bodies, which are intended to help us survive during famines. Because historically, these days, food supply is rather nicely regulated. So there are not, we don't encounter famines that often. But if you look at history, there used to be regular occurrences. So to survive during famines, you need some deposits in the body. Clotting of blood. So one amazing thing is that if your skin gets punctured, your blood keeps coming out. But sooner or later it is going to stop flowing, because if it doesn't flow, then of course you'll die. So sooner or later, the blood is going to get clotted, and that is an example of self-repair. So your body heals itself most of the time. And of course we have other examples of fault tolerance. Now we have 2 eyes. Now would you say that is redundant, or do you think we really need 2 eyes, or we could have done with 1?
Because like if someone has only 1 eye, they will lose only 1/5 of their vision.
Right.
So they can equally.
Yeah, if someone has just 1 eye, then you lose part of the vision, but you can still survive. So it is basically, if you lose 1 eye, then it is graceful degradation. So it is, as I was talking about here, sometimes you have a trade-off between reliability and performance. So if you lose 1 eye, then you can still do most of the things, but you lose the 3-dimensional vision, which is sometimes necessary. For example, sometimes you want to estimate how far something is in front of you. Fault tolerance is very common in man-made objects. You have redundancy or ordinary text. So how many of you like to read novels? Fiction? Okay. So I read them sometimes, but often I don't have patience, so I sometimes flip a few pages and skip things. And I found that a lot of times I can still get most of the picture, right? And that is because there's a lot of redundancy in ordinary text. And it is not necessarily bad, because people are not attentive. So sometimes a fact needs to be presented more than once. Asking for password twice during initial setup. So you must have encountered this. Sometimes you sign up for something and they ask you for your password. They will make you type your password twice, because that is where if you make a mistake, then you wouldn't be able to get in. In trucks, they have duplicate tires. So on cars, we just have, our tires are single tires, but trucks, they are much heavier, and a truck failing on the road, that would be a disaster. So the trucks have duplicate tires. Coin-operated machines, they check for bad coins. That's again an example of fault tolerance. Now you must have noticed that these examples of fault tolerance I had mentioned, they all involve use of redundancy. There is no such thing as a free lunch. So if you want fault tolerance, you have to pay for it, one way or the other. And basically you have to use redundancy. So this is how you implement fault tolerance. So you have the 3 types of, what did I say, 3? Depending on how you classify them. You have I actually have 2 more, but other 2 are not that well known. So these are the most common types of redundancy. But I will mention why I wanted to add a couple more. So one well-known example of redundancy is hardware redundancy, which you can call spatial redundancy, because it involves the use of more space. And it usually takes two forms.